Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week we'll take a look at one of our first general election races for the 20th Senate District. There are 3 people running. 2 are currently serving as state representatives. 1 other has served as a state representative, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Libertarian. We start with current sitting Representative Sean McCann, the Democrat running for Senate in the 20th District. Representative, let's start with the process of how you decided to run for this Senate seat. We know it is an open seat by virtue of the fact of the current senator is drawn into a different district now. You could have run for another term in the State House, but you decided to run for Senate. Why?
Sure. Well, an open seat, I think, presents a fairly unique opportunity. And I looked at what my priorities and what my values have been and what I think Kalamazoo County's priorities and values are, and I think they're in a good alignment. So I decided to take this step. There's 2 sides to the term limit debate. This certainly creates change when seats open and terms expire, but I think that I can make a greater impact in the state Senate, and I think again that my values and priorities align best with Kalamazoo County.
Let's talk about some of those priorities, because over the course of the past 4 years, you and I have talked a lot about things that you want to see done. You've served in the minority, and getting things done over in the House is difficult because of that. If you're successful in the Senate, you're likely to be in the minority there too, despite the fact I know Democrats are anxious to pick up seats, but you'd have to pick up a whole bunch to get a majority over in the Senate. So what are some of the things you'd like to work on over there?
Well, I think that the legislative alignment is probably going to change up this fall. Obviously, there's a very competitive race for the governor's office to take control of the state house, and I think hopefully a moderating of the state senate with the election of myself and some other folks there. So that, I think, makes policy better in Michigan. And what I'd like to work on is what I've made my priorities since I've served as a state representative and 10 years on the Kalamazoo City Commission. Education funding, we have to restore and really boost our education funding to our schools. Tax relief for middle class and senior citizens. We've seen the tax burden increase on senior citizens and the middle class in the last 3.5 years. And we're still stuck in 3rd place for unemployment in the country in the state of Michigan. So despite, I think, some job recovery primarily due to the auto industry rescue, there's a lot more work to do to bring about a more thriving economy, a better talented workforce, and a real sort of beacon priority on education. My district has the Kalamazoo Promise in it, which is an amazing thing to see happening in the district I represent. And I think that the lesson from it is that if you turbocharge education, public education, and really invest in our schools and our kids, that we can really create an amazing community and thereby an amazing state that everybody would want to come back to.
I'm not a CPA, but I'm always interested in numbers. If you want to spend more, I assume that's what I hear you saying, you want to spend more for education, and you want a tax relief, so I assume tax cuts for people in the middle class, there's got to be some give somewhere, because there isn't a lot of disposable money in the budget. Or do you believe there is disposable money in the budget?
Well, I think a lot of the surplus, there is a surplus in the budget, and a lot of that's been created by these tax increases on, for example, senior citizens, about $325 million a year in tax revenue from that senior citizen tax increase. So that's something that could be returned, in my view, because we have that surplus available. There are ways to find inefficiencies and waste in the state budget that we haven't investigated now. There's been an ongoing process where we've borrowed from the school aid fund to backfill the rest of the budget holes that have come about, or the priorities that we've wanted to fund. And I think those dollars should be returned to the school aid fund. All that will, I think, create with schools, better schools, less tax burden on the middle class, better paying and higher talent pool jobs, creates a growing Michigan that feeds that revenue and keeps that sustainable for the long term.
One of the things you talked about is getting out of the unemployment basement, if you will. We did a story recently where there are companies that are looking for people, but they can't find talent. So it isn't that there aren't jobs, one would suggest, but that the talent and the jobs don't match up. What do we do about that?
Well, I think that, again, investment in education is a longer-term strategy for filling that talent bank that is needed right now, and I hear that from employers as well. The other issue is I think there's been a reluctance to re-engage in the manufacturing trades and jobs that go with that because of their cyclical nature that we've seen in the state of Michigan. Auto industry is up, jobs are good, manufacturing is in need, but if we have another crash in auto demand or sales, then we're going to have a problem where people are going to be out of jobs in those sectors again. So somehow stabilizing and making sure that your talent set, your sort of advanced manufacturing is transportable, and as we diversify industry in Michigan, much like we have in Kalamazoo County, that will work better for the long term.
There is one area where some have suggested jobs could be created, but again, it costs a lot of money, and I want your take on roads. I know that you have been critical of the legislature for not doing something and being off this summer, but I'm not taking a side here, but when they were in session, they couldn't come up with a solution. So what is the solution from your perspective when it comes to what the governor has pegged at a $1.2 billion bill a year, but others say that the longer you wait, the higher that bill goes up, and it's going to have to be for 10 years. So maybe it's $1.5 billion, $15 billion over the next 10 years. How does that happen, or should that happen?
Well, I mean, it absolutely should happen because it's going to be more expensive the longer we wait. The House that I serve in passed some measures to try to begin to address the long-term funding issues, several $100 million. I supported that, except for tax increases on middle-class families. And the Senate, as we know, didn't take action on that, so that's unfortunate. And then, I think there was, we were right on the edge of getting a deal done in June when we adjourned, and I think we should have come back the next day and the next week, and we should be going back because that's the number one issue I hear people talking about as well, is what are you going to do? So that deal, how do you get to the massive sort of investment we need to make? I think that you have to eat an elephant a bite at a time, and you need to make those investments that build up over time. And this package had some revenue enhancements in it. Heavy trucks, overweight trucks, for example, were part of the deal. Looking at what is the best arrangement on fuel taxes and fairness to all vehicles involved. People driving fuel-efficient vehicles shouldn't necessarily be penalized for driving a car that uses less gas, but they're still using the same amount of roads as everybody else. So anyway, the overall solution here was, I think, to stay with it, go back to work, and we got that close to a deal. I think if we had been in a pressure situation a little bit longer, we could have had a breakthrough. And I'm just sorry that today, as we're talking today, the House is not in session, roads package is not apparently being worked on, and I think this extremely frustrates the voters.
Another current representative is Republican Margaret O'Brien. She won her party's nomination to run for the Senate in the 20th District. Representative, let's start with the motivation. You could have run for another term in the House. You decided to run for state Senate. Why?
A lot of people encouraged me to look at this open seat, and as I sat back, talked with my family, prayed about it, I realized this was a position that I'm well suited for. In the House, I've established a record of working in a bipartisan manner with both Republicans and Democrats and finding ways to come to a win-win for our communities in our state. And I felt this was a natural step to keep serving my community and to ensure that we have bipartisanship.
Let's talk about bipartisanship for a minute, because I think I got in trouble with Speaker Bolger some time ago when I had him on the show and pointed out that when he was first elected, he and Representative Siegel, both from Calhoun County, both had been on the county commission over there, one Republican, one Democrat, and that class particularly said to me on this show that we're going to go to Lansing and we're going to practice bipartisanship, we're going to learn how to work together, and we're going to do things together. I made the point to the Speaker that I didn't see a marked improvement in bipartisanship, and he went on to enumerate a number of things that he thought had improved. But let me say again, it's still a pretty partisan atmosphere, both in the House and in the Senate, despite the fact Republicans have majorities in both. How, if you have indeed worked in a bipartisan manner, how do you expand that to get people to work for the part that's possible, if politics is the art of what's possible, not just the far right or the far left?
I would say it's individuals who bring about solutions, not political parties. And when I looked at the issues that were important to people here in my community, they're not issues that have R's or D's stamped on them. And I'll pick on education. I have a strong bipartisan relationship with Representative Zemke out of Ann Arbor, a Democrat. And when I was asked to tackle some education issues, specifically student growth assessments and teacher and administrator evaluations, I said I would do it under two criteria. One is I get to pick the timeline, and two, I get to pick the people who we're going to work with. And immediately I reached out to Representative Zemke because I know he has a passion for education. And we have worked hand in hand. And when we disagree, we both listen to each other. We see what the goals are, what are the common goals, where are our differences, how do we bridge the differences? And what resulted is in legislation that the Michigan Education Association endorsed, Great Lakes Education Project endorsed, and all the different stakeholders in between. Because we said it can be done, so it got done. And this isn't just a once example. I have worked on social justice issues with Representative Robinson, adoption issues with Representative Kasowski, tax issues with Representative Lane. I sit back and I listen. What is it that's important to my colleagues? And when I see that that issue is also there in my community, I reach out and say, let's work together from the start, not just, I'll let you vote on the bill.
When you look at this Senate seat and what you might be able to accomplish if you are successful in November, what are the issues that you hear about when you're talking to people here in Kalamazoo County?
When it comes to specific issues, roads are number one. But close behind is people's concern that we may get a little bit too comfortable. We have to keep improving the economy. Jobs are still a top 3 issue. Third would be education. People want us to continue our investment in education. And when it comes to an issue that isn't really like necessarily something like education, they say they're tired of the political fighting. They want bipartisan cooperation. Because the fact is, when I talk about education, I don't see kids in schools with little R's and D's stamped on their forehead. So I'm not sure why these issues are treated as political footballs. But my experience has been if you just talk about the issue and you work with everybody who has an interest, we can find some great solutions.
When you talk about education, though, it's quite clear that the unions that support and work with teachers have very often supported Democrats. Republicans have very often supported charter schools that unions and union teachers are not necessarily in support of. So there is a partisan flavor to education without the R's and D's being stamped on the students, right?
You know, what's happened is we've relied on political parties to get power to then find a solution. Representative Zemke and I sat down and said, what are our goals? First, to help students improve academically. Second, to give teachers the tools they need to help students. And once we established our goals, all the partisan leanings went away. And so there's the problem is we think about elections and then figuring out solutions. I make the case, let's look at the individuals and do they have a track record of bringing about solutions and working with all the stakeholders involved? Let's look at that first. Let's get rid of the politics. And that's what I've been working to do is get rid of the politics.
Let's talk about roads. There is another issue that has become political. In the House, you passed legislation that gets part of the way towards what the governor has said is a $1.2, $1.5 billion a year additional each year for a decade. But the Senate didn't take it up, and your bill didn't get nearly to 1.2, maybe halfway at very best. So, if that's the number one issue, what's the number one answer?
I tell the constituents what we had to do is it starts like a snowball. You start small and you start working where we all can agree. And we were able to do that with first pulling funds out of the general fund in the last 2 budget cycles and allocating over $300 million extra dollars. Step 2 was finding $500 million of ongoing revenue. Now step 3 is to make up that other $500 million or $700 million, however we want to slice it. And that's where we need to sit down. But it's been a stumbling block in the Senate. No matter the solution, they've not been able to come together to get majority votes for anything. And that's where I like to think that I would be able to offer something. And that's, I've got strong working relationships with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I'm pretty hard to offend. I like to work with people. Let's listen to each other more, and let's put the politics aside and focus on good policy. And I think the Senate could use some more of that attitude.
When you talk about jobs, Republicans are fond of saying that government doesn't create jobs. But what is it you can do as a functionary of government that helps enable jobs to be created?
We need to ensure that our regulations actually fit today's marketplace. And for example, for every new regulation we've implemented, we've repealed over 10. We also need to make sure that the tax system is as broad and as fair as possible. And then finally, we have to make sure that as we're developing policies, that we're not negatively discouraging people from coming to our state. I'm a real estate agent. I'm self-employed. And what happens throughout the state directly impacts the people that I serve, the value of their houses. I saw in 2010 how bad it was in our community. And today, the average home is selling for over $11,000 more per house. We are at numbers that we last saw in 2006, which was the peak of the economy. So it's really important to watch some of the factors that really show if government's intervening correctly or intervening incorrectly in the marketplace. And I think we've done a good job of trying to make regulations and taxes make sense to those who create jobs.
And yet another person who has served as a state representative would like to be the 20th District Senator. Lawrence Winkie is running, but this time he's changing parties. We'll talk to him about that when we come back. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We're talking about the 20th Senate District this morning. It is an open seat, currently represented by Senator Tanya Shootmaker, but because the lines were redrawn, she's now in a different Senate district. So this time there will be a new senator elected. You've met the Republican and the Democrat running. Now, here is new Libertarian, Lawrence Winkie. Well, let me start with you where I start with everybody. Your motivation for running, but a little extra question for you because you have run and served as a Republican in the State House of Representatives, but now running for the state Senate, you're running as a Libertarian. So why are you running and why as a Libertarian?
I decided to run as a Libertarian for two main reasons, and I've published these to anybody who wants to read them. I believe that the Republican Party has led the effort in our Kalamazoo County, our state and our nation in an effort to discriminate against our gay family members, friends, and neighbors. And I don't want to be part of a party that does that anymore. That's my number one reason. My second reason is I believe that the Republican Party has been just as abusive of taxpayer dollars when it comes to government employee compensation as what any other group has. So for those two primary reasons, I left the Republican Party and became a Libertarian.
Let's say you're successful in November. What is it you want to achieve in the state Senate? Obviously, you just talked about taxes and spending. I assume that's part of it. But what is the issue that you want to work on the most?
You know, when I was my last 2 years in the legislature, I've got a great compliment from the Mackinac Public Policy Institute about the 21 bills that I introduced while I was in Lansing that dealt with government employee compensation. And that probably is what I'm best known for in Lansing, and also what I want to continue to work on in Lansing. In the city of Kalamazoo, we recently had a city manager retire who after 24 years of work will get a pension of $110,000 a year the rest of his life, plus free health care. And I believe this is an abuse of taxpayers that needs to be stopped. It's happening all over the state. The city of Detroit is in the financial situation it's in largely because of excessive employee compensation. We need to stop that, and I want to work on it.
When you talk about excessive employee compensation, there will be people who are sitting out there right now who are working for the government that say, wait a minute, I work 40 plus hours a week, I'm providing a valuable service. How do you determine what someone that is working for government should be paid? Because we have a lot of government employees in this state, and a lot of them are providing services every day.
The research, the surveys, the analysis on government compensation versus private sector compensation has been done many times by many people. It always comes back showing that government employees have an excessive compensation for similar responsibilities as what the private sector does. And I have a unique experience that when I go to Lansing that I bring to Lansing that most legislators don't have. I'm a real business person in the real private sector. My company has got 4 locations in 2 states. We employ over 400 people in the spring. Our payroll is tens of millions of dollars. I have some much better idea of what it takes to work in the private sector versus the public sector, and I know both quite well. And I have good basis for my positions, and I will gladly debate them with anybody.
When you look at what is going on in government, in fact, you made the comment before we sat down that government has become more complex, and it certainly has. There's no question that over the decades that I've been covering it, it has gotten more and more and more complex. When you look at what's going on in Lansing in the years since you've been gone, and when you look at some of the challenges that are facing the state, how do you deal with things, for example, like infrastructure, like roads, like bridges? We know that that's a debate that's going on now. There are 6 senators that are working on a plan to maybe come up with $1.2, $1.5 billion a year for the next decade to try to fix roads. But how do you approach something like that?
You know, there's a lot of good minds across the state that can give us a fair analysis of where we're at and where we need to be. I'm not sure that the position that the governor has of the amount of money that he thinks we need to repair roads is accurate. I haven't really seen or heard of any study or analysis that you could say that really backs that up with facts, but it's probably close. And there are several ways we can get at that. The easy way is for the legislature simply to go in and vote when they go back to work at the end of a long summer of not working to increase the state tax per gallon of fuel. That's how it's taxed right now, and that's the simplest, easiest way. So that they could do that if they really believe that we're getting good value for our dollars and it will fix the problem. Another thing they can do is allow more local units of government to have local millage votes by citizens for tax increases if citizens want to do it, or a statewide vote would be acceptable as well. So I'm not convinced that we have got roads that are so bad that we need to raise taxes dramatically to fix them. But I think the road commissions have done a great job of using their dollars efficiently that they've been given. They haven't gotten very many more dollars over the last 20 years or so. So I think they are reasonable in their request for more money.
Has Lansing changed significantly from the time you started serving to today? Do you think the culture, I mean, the city has changed, but I mean, the culture of government in Lansing?
Yeah, when I was there, we had a divided government. We had Governor Granholm, a Democrat, a Republican-controlled legislature for my first 4 years there. So it's entirely different when you operate government when you've got divided powers like that. The last 4 years have been a honeymoon as far as Republicans are concerned, as far as getting things done. So in Washington, we've all seen the divisiveness there, but quite frankly, I don't mind debate. I don't mind divisiveness as long as it's done professionally, properly, for the best interest of citizens. That's what we want government people to do. We want them to debate. We want them to discuss. But then we want them to vote and settle an issue and go on to the next one.
We just got a few seconds left. Tell me what it would look like if you prevail in November. You would be a party of one, perhaps, because there aren't libertarians serving now in the state Senate. What would that do to your ability to bring people together or get consensus for the things you want to do?
Similar situations exist in Washington and our federal government, and the people who are elected as independents. Well, they can make their choice as to which party they're going to support on an issue. The same thing would happen in Lansing. Actually, there's 2 Republicans, 2 Libertarians running in Kalamazoo County. Mike Stampfler, who's been a Portage City manager for 20-some years, did a great job. So there's 2 of us on the ballot in Kalamazoo County. I think in Lansing, if it was close in terms of who's a majority and who's a minority, a Libertarian can make a big difference. But one vote usually doesn't make a dramatic difference in the House or the Senate. Sometimes it does, and I could be that vote.
We're back with the final note on To the Point in just a moment. Well, the general election is now less than 80 days away, and we'll be featuring those general election races between now and November. I hope you'll join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock for To the Point.